The rope burns on Rosa Hartley's wrists had stopped bleeding an hour ago, but the pain was still sharp enough to remind her that this nightmare was real as she stood on a wooden platform in the center of Castle Dome, Arizona, with her hands bound behind her back and dozens of eyes assessing her worth like she was nothing more than livestock. The August sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty mining town in 1876, and Rosa could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath the tattered remains of what had once been a respectable traveling dress. 3 weeks ago, she had been a schoolteacher from Philadelphia, traveling west to start a new life in California after her father's death had left her with nothing but debts and broken promises. The stagecoach attack had happened so fast. One moment, she was reading a book about Western territories, and the next, masked men were dragging her and 2 other women from the wreckage while the driver lay dead in the dirt. The other women had been separated from her days ago, sold off in some nameless town she could not even remember the name of now. Rosa had fought harder, earned herself a black eye and split lip for her trouble, and now found herself here in this God-forsaken corner of Arizona, about to be sold to the highest bidder. "Gentlemen, this here's a fine specimen," the auctioneer called out, a greasy man named Virgil who smelled of whiskey and tobacco. "Young, strong, educated from what I hear. She can read and write, cook and clean. What am I bid for this pretty little filly?" Rosa felt bile rise in her throat at his words, at the way the men below looked at her with hunger and calculation. Some were miners, their faces permanently stained with dirt and their eyes hollow from years of fruitless digging. Others were businessmen, well-dressed and cruel-looking, the type who would work a woman to death in a brothel or worse. She scanned the crowd desperately, looking for anyone who might show a shred of human decency, but found only greed and indifference. $50, someone called out, and the bidding began. Rosa's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. She would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her mother had always told her that Hartley women were made of stronger stuff, that they could weather any storm. But her mother had never imagined this, could never have conceived that her daughter would end up on an auction block in the middle of the desert, being sold like property. 75, another voice shouted. 100, came a third. The numbers climbed higher, and Rosa felt her hope draining away with each bid. She thought about her father, about how he had lost everything gambling, about how his death had left her vulnerable and alone. She thought about the teaching position waiting for her in San Francisco, about the life she would never have now. She thought about throwing herself off this platform and ending it all before whoever won this sick auction could claim her. $500. The voice cut through the crowd like a knife, deep and authoritative, and the entire square fell silent. Rosa's head snapped up, searching for the source, and her eyes landed on a man standing at the back of the crowd. He was tall, over 6 feet easily, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build that spoke of hard physical labor. He wore a black hat pulled low over his face, dark pants, and a worn leather vest over a blue shirt. 2 pistols hung at his hips, and everything about his stance suggested he knew how to use them. But it was not the guns that caught Rosa's attention. It was the way he stood apart from the other men, the way he did not leer or grin like the others. There was something different in his eyes, something that looked almost like anger. $500, Virgil repeated, his voice rising with excitement. "Do I hear 525? The crowd murmured, but no one spoke up. $500 was more money than most of these men saw in 6 months. The stranger walked forward slowly, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. As he drew closer, Rosa could see his face more clearly. He was younger than she had first thought, probably in his late 20s, with a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of dark stubble and intense blue eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, and his skin was tanned from years under the desert sun. "Going once," Virgil called out, his eyes darting nervously between the stranger and the rest of the crowd. "Going twice. 600, a voice rang out from the right. Rosa turned to see a fat man in an expensive suit, a silver watch chain glinting across his belly. She recognized the type immediately. A brothel owner, probably, or someone who made his money off the suffering of others. The stranger's jaw tightened, and he took another step forward. $1,000. Gold. Gasps rippled through the crowd. That was an extraordinary sum, more than many men earned in a year of backbreaking work in the mines. The fat man's face turned red, but he shook his head and stepped back. No one else spoke. Sold. Virgil practically shouted, dollar signs dancing in his eyes. Sold to the gentleman for $1,000. The stranger moved toward the platform, reaching into his vest and pulling out a leather pouch that clinked heavily with coins. He tossed it to Virgil, who caught it greedily and immediately began counting. Rosa watched this transaction in stunned silence, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. What did this man want with her? Why had he paid so much? He climbed the steps to the platform with an easy, confident grace, and suddenly he was standing right in front of her. Up close, she could see flecks of gray in his dark hair, could smell leather and sage and something else, something clean and masculine that made her head spin. His eyes met hers, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Turn around," he said quietly, his voice rough but not unkind. Rosa hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run, to fight, to do anything but obey. But where would she run? She was in the middle of a hostile town, surrounded by men who saw her as nothing more than merchandise. Slowly, she turned, presenting her bound wrists. She heard the whisper of metal against leather as he drew a knife, and her breath caught in her throat. This was it. He had bought her just to kill her, to add her to whatever collection of horrors he kept. But then she felt the blade, cool and sharp, sliding between her wrists and the rope. One quick motion, and the bonds fell away. Rosa gasped as blood rushed back into her hands, the sensation painful and wonderful at the same time. She turned back around, rubbing her raw wrists, and stared at the stranger in confusion and disbelief. He sheathed his knife and met her gaze steadily. "You are coming home," he said simply, and there was something in his voice, something that sounded almost like a promise. Before Rosa could respond, before she could even process what he had just said, he turned and began walking toward the edge of the platform. He paused when he realized she was not following, glancing back over his shoulder. "Well," he said, "you can stand there and wait for one of these other gentlemen to make me a better offer, or you can come with me. Your choice." It was not really a choice, not when the alternative was being dragged back onto that auction block or worse. Rosa forced her trembling legs to move, following him down the steps and through the crowd. The men parted for them, some muttering angrily, others just watching with calculating eyes. She kept her gaze straight ahead, refusing to look at any of them, focusing instead on the stranger's broad back as he led her through the dusty streets of Castle Dome. They walked in silence for several minutes, passing ramshackle buildings and tents that served as homes for the miners who had flocked to this area, hoping to strike it rich. The town was little more than a supply station for the nearby mines, a rough and lawless place where violence was common and justice was rare. Rosa had heard stories about Arizona Territory, about how it was still wild and dangerous, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The stranger led her to a hitching post where two horses waited, a large black stallion and a smaller chestnut mare. He untied them both, then turned to Rosa and held out the mare's reins. "Can you ride?" he asked. Rosa nodded, though in truth she had only ridden a handful of times in her life, and never on anything but the most gentle and docile of horses. The mare looked spirited, her dark eyes intelligent and alert. "Good," he said. He moved to help her mount, placing his hands on her waist and lifting her into the saddle with surprising gentleness. Rosa's breath hitched at the contact, at the strength in his hands and the warmth of his touch, even through her dress. Once she was settled, he mounted his own horse with practiced ease, settling into the saddle like he had been born there. "Where are we going?" Rosa finally found her voice, though it came out hoarse and uncertain. "About 10 miles north," he replied, turning his horse toward the edge of town. "My ranch, the Double R." "Wait," Rosa said, pulling on the reins to keep the mare from following. "I do not even know your name. I do not know anything about you. How do I know you are not going to hurt me?" He looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "Name's Daniel Reeves," he said finally. "And if I wanted to hurt you, I would have left you on that platform. Now come on. I want to be home before dark." He clicked his tongue and his horse started moving. After a moment's hesitation, Rosa followed. What choice did she have? She was alone in a strange and hostile land with no money, no friends, and no way to protect herself. At least Daniel Reeves had cut her bonds. At least he had not looked at her the way the other men had. It was not much, but it was something to hold on to. They rode out of Castle Dome heading north, leaving behind the crowded, filthy streets and heading into open desert. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, nothing but sand and scrub brush and jagged rocks as far as the eye could see. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks hazy in the afternoon heat. Rosa had never seen anything like it. Pennsylvania had been green and lush, full of forests and rolling hills. This place looked like God had forgotten about it, had left it to bake under the relentless sun until everything living had given up and died. But as they rode, Rosa began to notice small signs of life. A hawk circling overhead, riding the thermal currents. A lizard scurrying across a rock, its scales glinting like jewels. Wildflowers, tough and resilient, pushing up through cracks in the earth. The desert was not dead, she realized. It was just different, adapted to survive in conditions that would kill anything else. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked after they had been riding for nearly an hour. The silence had stretched too long, become too heavy with unspoken questions. 7 years, Daniel said without looking back at her. "Came out after the war. The war." That would have made him maybe 21 or 22 when he arrived, assuming he had been old enough to fight. Rosa did some quick math in her head. That would put him around 28 now, only 5 years older than her own 23 years. The war between the states. She asked, though she knew the answer. "That's the one." His voice was flat, discouraging further questions on that topic. Rosa fell silent again, watching the way he sat his horse, easy and relaxed despite the heat and the rough terrain. Everything about him spoke of competence, of a man who knew this land and knew how to survive in it. She wondered what he had been before the war, where he had come from, what had brought him to this desolate corner of the world. "Why did you buy me?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it, raw and desperate. "Why did you pay so much money for someone you do not even know?" Daniel was quiet for so long that Rosa thought he might not answer. Then he reined in his horse and turned to face her. His expression was hard to read, somewhere between anger and sadness. "My sister," he said quietly. 3 years ago she was traveling from Texas to meet me here. Apache raiders hit her stage, By the time I tracked them down, she was gone, sold off probably, or worse. I looked for 2 years, spent every cent I had, called in every favor I was owed, never found her, never even found out what happened to her. Rosa felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I swore that if I ever had the chance to save someone else's sister, someone else's daughter, I would take it." He met her eyes and she saw the pain there, carefully hidden but still present. "So that is why I bought you. That is why I am taking you to my ranch. You will work for me until you have earned back the $1,000 I paid for you, and then you will be free to go wherever you want. That is the deal. Take it or leave it." Rosa stared at him, trying to process what he was telling her. He had bought her not for himself, not to use her or hurt her, but because of his sister. Because he had not been able to save her, and he needed to save someone. It was perhaps the most selfless and most selfish thing she had ever heard of, and she did not know whether to be grateful or angry. "How long will it take?" she asked. "To work off $1,000. "Depends on how hard you work," Daniel said with a shrug. "Could be a year, could be 2. I pay fair wages, $20 a month plus room and board. You will do cooking, cleaning, mending, maybe help with the horses if you are capable. It is not easy work, but it is honest work, and no one will hurt you or disrespect you. That is my promise. $20 a month. That meant it would take over 4 years to pay back what he had spent on her. 4 years of her life, working on a ranch in the middle of nowhere for a man she did not know. But the alternative had been so much worse. The alternative had been a living death. "I accept," Rosa said, lifting her chin. "But I want your word as a gentleman that you will honor what you just said. That I will be safe on your ranch." Something that might have been respect flickered in Daniel's eyes. "You have my word," he said solemnly. "On my honor as a former officer of the Confederate Army and as a rancher of the Arizona Territory, you will be safe under my roof." Rosa nodded, and they resumed riding. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange. Despite the heat and her exhaustion, despite everything she had been through, Rosa felt something stirring in her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but something close to it. She had survived the stagecoach attack. She had survived being kidnapped and dragged across half the territory. She had survived the auction block. And now, against all odds, she had found herself in the care of a man who at least claimed to mean her no harm. It would have to be enough. For now, it would have to be enough. Another hour of riding brought them to the ranch. It appeared suddenly as they crested a small rise, a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley where a creek ran year-round. Rosa could see the main house, a sturdy structure made of adobe with a wooden porch running along the front. Behind it stood a barn, a stable, and several smaller outbuildings. Corrals held horses and cattle, and she could see green fields where crops were growing, a shocking splash of color in the brown and tan landscape. "Welcome to the Double R," Daniel said, and there was a note of pride in his voice that had been absent before. "It is not much, but it is mine. Bought the land with my mustering out pay and everything I could borrow, built most of the buildings with my own hands." "It is beautiful," Rosa said, and she meant it. After the bleakness of the desert, after the squalor of Castle Dome, the ranch looked like an oasis, a place where life could not just survive but thrive. As they rode down toward the buildings, a figure emerged from the barn. Rosa tensed, but Daniel raised a hand in greeting. "That is Miguel," he said. "He and his wife Alina live in the small house past the barn. They have been with me since the beginning. Good people. You will like them." Miguel was a man in his 40s, stocky and strong with graying hair and a weathered face that broke into a smile when he saw Daniel. He called out something in Spanish, rapid and cheerful, and Daniel replied in the same language. Rosa felt a pang of inadequacy. She did not speak Spanish, had never needed to in Philadelphia, but out here it seemed like everyone did. They dismounted in front of the main house, and Daniel handed his reins to Miguel while explaining something in low tones. Miguel's expression shifted from cheerful to serious as he glanced at Rosa, then back to Daniel. He nodded once, then led both horses toward the barn. "Come on," Daniel said to Rosa, gesturing toward the house. "You look like you are about to fall over. Let me show you where you will be staying." Rosa followed him up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior of the house was simple but well maintained. The main room served as both living area and kitchen, with a large fireplace, a sturdy wooden table and chairs, and shelves lined with books and supplies. Doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms. "That is my room," Daniel said, pointing to the door on the left. "That one on the right will be yours. It was meant to be for my sister when she finally arrived. It has been empty since I built the place." He opened the door to reveal a small but comfortable room with a real bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and even a small mirror on the wall. A window looked out over the creek and curtains fluttered in the breeze. It was more than Rosa had dared hope for. "There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," Daniel said, his tone businesslike now. "I will have Alina bring you some clean clothes. You are about her size, I think. Get some rest. We will talk more in the morning about your duties." He turned to leave, but Rosa called out to him. "Daniel," he paused, looking back at her. It was the first time she had used his name, and it felt strange on her tongue, too familiar and yet not familiar enough. "Thank you," she said simply, "for what you did today, for bringing me here instead of leaving me there." His expression softened slightly. "You do not have to thank me," he said. "Just work hard and stay out of trouble. That will be thanks enough." Then he was gone, closing the door behind him and leaving Rosa alone for the first time since this nightmare had begun. She stood there for a moment, swaying slightly with exhaustion, then stumbled to the bed and collapsed onto it. The mattress was filled with straw, not feathers, but it felt like heaven compared to the hard ground she had been sleeping on for weeks. She meant to get up, to wash her face and hands, to try to make herself presentable. But the moment her head touched the pillow, darkness rushed up to claim her, and she fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. When Rosa woke, the room was bathed in the soft gray light of early dawn. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, could not reconcile the comfortable bed and quiet surroundings with the horrors of yesterday. Then it all came rushing back. The auction, Daniel, the ride to the ranch. She sat up slowly, wincing at the aches in her muscles and the persistent pain in her wrists. A neat stack of clothes sat on the chest of drawers, along with a bar of soap and a towel. Someone had come in while she slept, had left these things for her without waking her. Rosa felt a rush of gratitude toward Alina, who she had not even met yet. She poured water into the basin and washed herself as thoroughly as she could, scrubbing away the dirt and sweat and fear of the past weeks. The water turned gray and murky, but she felt cleaner anyway, more human. She examined the clothes Alina had left. A simple cotton dress in a dark blue, well worn but clean and mended, undergarments, thick stockings, even a pair of sturdy leather boots that looked about her size. Rosa dressed quickly, fumbling a bit with the unfamiliar fastenings. The dress was looser than she was used to, cut for practicality rather than fashion, but it felt good to be in clean clothes again. She ran her fingers through her tangled hair, trying to work out the worst of the snarls, wishing desperately for a proper brush. When she finally felt presentable enough to face the world, she left her room and ventured into the main living area. Daniel was already up, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a ledger spread out in front of him. He looked up when she entered, his eyes taking in her changed appearance. "You look better," he said bluntly. "More like a person and less like something the desert tried to kill." Rosa did not know whether to be offended or amused by this assessment. "Thank you, I think," she said. "And thank you for the clothes. Please tell Alina I am very grateful." "Tell her yourself," Daniel said, nodding toward the door. "She will be here soon to start breakfast. You can help her. That will be one of your main duties, cooking for me and the ranch hands." "Ranch hands?" Rosa asked. "I thought it was just you and Miguel and Alina." "Usually it is," Daniel agreed. "But this time of year we sometimes hire on a few extra men for cattle work and haying. Right now there are 2 others staying in the bunkhouse, James and Tucker. You will meet them at breakfast." Rosa's stomach clenched with anxiety. More men. More strangers to be wary of, but Daniel seemed to sense her unease because his expression softened slightly. "They are good men," he said. "I would not keep them on if they were not, and they know that anyone who disrespects you will answer to me. You are under my protection here, Rosa." "I meant what I said yesterday." Hearing him use her name sent a small shiver through her. She had not realized he knew it, had not told him herself. He must have learned it from Virgil or from papers the kidnappers had taken from her belongings. "How did you know?" she asked. "Know what?" "My name? I never told you." Daniel had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "The auctioneer mentioned it," he said. "Said you were a school teacher from back east named Rosa Hartley. Seemed important to know the name of the person I was spending $1,000 on." Before Rosa could respond, the door opened and a woman entered carrying a basket of eggs. She was around 40, with dark hair streaked with gray and warm brown eyes that crinkled when she smiled. She stopped when she saw Rosa, her expression shifting from surprise to delight. "Ah, you must be Rosa," she said, her English lightly accented. "I am Alina Vasquez. Welcome, welcome. I am so glad you are here. This house needs another woman. All these men, they are no good at keeping things civilized." Alina set down her basket and enveloped Rosa in a warm hug before she could react. It was so unexpected, so genuinely kind, that Rosa felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She had not been embraced like this since her mother died 5 years ago. "Thank you for the clothes," Rosa managed to say when Alina released her. "They fit perfectly." "Good, good," Alina said, already bustling toward the kitchen area. "Now come, you will help me with breakfast. We have hungry men to feed and there is much to do." Rosa followed Alina, grateful to have something concrete to focus on. Alina set her to work slicing bread and setting the table while she fried eggs and salt pork in a large iron skillet. As they worked, Alina kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Rosa questions about where she was from, how she had ended up in Castle Dome, what she thought of Arizona territory so far. Rosa found herself answering honestly, even about the attack and the kidnapping. There was something about Alina's open, sympathetic manner that invited confidence. When Rosa described the auction, Alina made a disgusted sound and muttered something in Spanish that was clearly uncomplimentary about the men involved. "Daniel did a good thing bringing you here," Alina said firmly. "He is a good man, even if he does not always show it. Since his sister disappeared, he has been so serious, so sad. But I think maybe having you here will be good for him too." Rosa was not sure what to make of that comment, so she said nothing. She was saved from having to respond by the arrival of Miguel and the 2 ranch hands, James and Tucker. The men trooped in, removing their hats and nodding politely to Rosa. James was young, maybe 19, with red hair and a face full of freckles. Tucker was older, probably in his 30s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. They all sat down to breakfast, and for a little while the only sounds were the clinking of forks on plates and the occasional request to pass something. Rosa ate slowly, savoring the simple food. It had been so long since she had eaten a proper meal, and even salt pork and eggs tasted like a feast. After breakfast, the men headed out to start their day's work, and Alina put Rosa to work washing dishes and then helping to prepare dough for bread that would rise throughout the day. As they worked, Rosa found herself relaxing slightly. Alina was easy to be around, not demanding or critical, just matter-of-fact about what needed to be done. "You said you were a school teacher," Alina said as they kneaded dough side by side. "That is good. Maybe you can teach my grandchildren when they visit. They live in Yuma with my daughter, but they come here sometimes in the winter." "I would like that," Rosa said, and she meant it. She missed teaching, missed the satisfaction of watching young minds grasp new concepts and ideas. The morning passed in a blur of domestic tasks. After the bread was set to rise, Alina showed Rosa around the ranch, pointing out where everything was kept, introducing her to the chickens she would be responsible for feeding, showing her the vegetable garden that needed weeding. It was overwhelming, so much to learn and remember, but Rosa threw herself into it with determination. She had agreed to work off her debt, and she would do it to the best of her ability. At midday, they prepared a cold lunch and carried it out to the men who were working in the fields. Daniel and Miguel were mending a section of fence, while James and Tucker were clearing brush from an irrigation ditch. Daniel barely glanced up when Rosa and Alina arrived with the food, just nodded his thanks and kept working. But Rosa caught him watching her out of the corner of his eye when he thought she was not looking, and she wondered what he was thinking. The afternoon brought more work. Laundry, which meant heating water and scrubbing clothes on a washboard until Rosa's arms ached. Mending, which she was better at, sitting on the porch with a basket of shirts and pants that needed patches or buttons. Alina worked beside her, and they talked about small things, inconsequential things, and Rosa felt something in her chest gradually unclenching. By the time evening came and supper was served, Rosa was exhausted but oddly satisfied. She had survived her first full day on the Double R Ranch. She had worked hard, earned her keep, and no one had hurt her or threatened her. It was more than she had dared hope for just yesterday. After the supper dishes were washed and put away, Alina and Miguel headed back to their own house, leaving Rosa and Daniel alone. The silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. Rosa fidgeted with her skirt, unsure whether she should excuse herself to her room or stay and try to make conversation. "You did well today," Daniel said finally, not looking at her, his eyes fixed on the fire crackling in the fireplace. "Alina said you are a hard worker." "Thank you," Rosa said. "Alina is a good teacher." More silence. Then Daniel stood and walked to a shelf, returning with a book and a pencil. He held them out to Rosa. "This is the ledger for the ranch," he said. "I will mark down each month how much you have earned and how much you still owe. That way there will be no confusion or disagreement. Does that sound fair?" Rosa took the ledger and opened it. On the first page, Daniel had written her name and the date, along with the amount owed, $1,000. It looked impossibly large, a mountain of debt that would take forever to climb. "It is fair," she said quietly. Daniel nodded and returned to his chair. "There are books on that shelf if you want to read," he said, gesturing. "I know you are educated. No reason you should be bored in the evenings when the work is done." Rosa looked at the shelf and felt her heart lift. Books. She had not expected that, had not dared to think that this rough rancher would have any use for books, but the shelf held a surprising collection. Agricultural manuals, yes, but also history, poetry, even a few novels. "Thank you," she said, and this time there was real warmth in her voice. "That is very kind." Daniel shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the gratitude. "They were just gathering dust," he said gruffly. "Might as well be used." Rosa selected a volume of poetry and settled into a chair by the fireplace. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, Daniel going over accounts and Rosa reading. It felt almost domestic, almost normal, and Rosa had to remind herself that this was not her home, that Daniel was not her friend or family, that she was here only because he had bought her and she owed him a debt. But still, it was more than she had expected. And as the fire burned low and the night deepened outside, Rosa allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, she could make a life here. At least for as long as it took to earn her freedom. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Rosa would wake before dawn and help Alina prepare breakfast for the men. After they ate and headed out to work, she would tackle the day's chores, cooking, cleaning, mending, tending the garden and the chickens. The work was hard and relentless, but it was also honest and satisfying in a way that teaching had never quite been. At the end of each day, she could see the tangible results of her labor: clean clothes, a tidy house, a good meal on the table. Daniel remained distant but not unkind. He spoke to her when necessary, always polite, always respectful, but never personal. He did not ask about her life before the auction, did not pry into her thoughts or feelings. Rosa was grateful for this at first, relieved not to have to relive the trauma of the past weeks. But as days turned into weeks, she found herself growing curious about him in return. She learned things by observation and from Alina's chatter. Daniel had been a captain in the Confederate cavalry, had seen action in Virginia and Tennessee. After the war, he had drifted west like so many other former soldiers, looking for a place to start over where the past did not matter so much. He had worked as a scout and a guide before saving enough money to buy this land and start his ranch. He was respected in Castle Dome and the surrounding area, known as a fair but tough man who kept his word and did not back down from trouble, and he had loved his sister deeply. That much was clear from the way his expression would shudder whenever Alina mentioned her, from the way he kept her room ready even though she would never come home. Rosa understood grief, understood the way it could hollow you out and leave you going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. She saw that same grief in Daniel, buried deep, but always present. About a month after Rosa's arrival, Daniel announced at breakfast that he needed to make a trip to Yuma to sell some cattle and pick up supplies. It would take 3 days there and back, maybe 4. Rosa felt an unexpected pang of anxiety at the thought of him leaving. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to the sense of safety that came from knowing he was nearby. "Miguel will be in charge while I am gone," Daniel said, his eyes sweeping over everyone at the table. "You all know what needs to be done. James, Tucker, I need you to finish clearing that north field. Miguel, keep an eye on the irrigation. Rosa, you just keep doing what you have been doing. Alina will be here if you need anything." That afternoon, Rosa was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up to see Daniel leading his black stallion from the barn, his saddlebags packed and his rifle secured to the saddle. He saw her watching and changed direction, walking over to where she knelt among the vegetables. "I will be back in a few days," he said unnecessarily. Then, after a pause, "If anyone gives you trouble while I am gone, you tell Miguel immediately. Understand?" "I understand," Rosa said, shading her eyes against the sun to look up at him. "But I will be fine. You do not need to worry about me." Something flickered in his blue eyes, something she could not quite read. "Maybe," he said, "but I will worry anyway." He turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at her. "Rosa," he said, and there was something different in his voice, something almost vulnerable. "You have done good work this past month, better than I expected. I want you to know that I appreciate it." Rosa felt warmth bloom in her chest at the unexpected praise. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a great deal to me." Daniel nodded once, then mounted his horse and rode away. Rosa watched until he disappeared over the rise, then returned to her weeding with a strange, fluttery feeling in her stomach that she did not want to examine too closely. The next 3 days passed uneventfully. Rosa fell into the routine of ranch work, and without Daniel's presence, she found herself talking more with Alina, learning more about the older woman's life. Alina had been born in Mexico, but had come to Arizona as a young bride with Miguel. They had raised 3 children, all now grown and living in other parts of the territory. Alina spoke of them with such love and pride that Rosa felt a pang of envy. What would it be like to have that kind of family, that kind of connection? On the evening of the 3rd day, Rosa was preparing supper when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, more than just Daniel returning. She stepped out onto the porch and felt her blood run cold. 5 men were riding toward the house, and Daniel was not among them. These were rough-looking characters, the kind she had seen in Castle Dome, with hard eyes and harder expressions. The man in front was the fat one from the auction, the one who had bid against Daniel, the brothel owner. Rosa's heart began to pound. She turned to run back inside to get Miguel, but the men were too fast. They dismounted and surrounded the porch before she could move. "Well, well," the fat man said, his voice oily and unpleasant. "If it is not the pretty little schoolteacher. I have been thinking about you, wondering how you were getting along out here with Reeves." "You need to leave," Rosa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is private property and you are not welcome here." The man laughed and his companions joined in. "Not welcome? That is not very hospitable, now is it, boys? And here I came all this way just to make you a business proposition." "I do not want to hear any proposition from you," Rosa said, backing toward the door. "Please leave, or I will get the ranch hands." "The ranch hands?" The fat man looked around mockingly. "You mean those 2 boys and the old Mexican? I do not think they are going to be much help to you, sweetheart. See, I have been watching this place. I know Reeves left 3 days ago. I know he is not here to protect you. And I know that he paid $1,000 for something that should have been mine." Rosa's hand found the door handle and she gripped it tightly. "Daniel will be back soon," she said. "If you are still here when he arrives, you will regret it." "Maybe," the fat man said, taking a step closer. "But I will be long gone by then. You see, I have decided that you are going to come work for me after all. I have got a nice establishment in Yuma, very profitable. A girl like you, educated and pretty, you would make me a fortune." "I would rather die," Rosa spat. "That can be arranged too," the man said, his expression turning ugly. "Now you can come along quietly, or my boys here can make you come along. Either way, you are leaving with us." Rosa opened her mouth to scream, but before any sound could emerge, a shot rang out. The bullet kicked up dust right in front of the fat man's feet, and he jumped back with a curse. Everyone's head swung toward the source of the shot. Daniel sat on his horse at the top of the rise, his rifle still raised to his shoulder. Even from a distance, Rosa could see the fury in his posture, in the rigid line of his shoulders. He lowered the rifle and urged his horse forward at a gallop, closing the distance between them in seconds. "Get off my land," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Now." The fat man tried to bluster. "Now see here, Reeves, I've got just as much right to make this girl an offer as you did. More even, since I bid on her fair and square." "You did not bid high enough," Daniel said, dismounting in one fluid motion. "I bought her, which means she is under my protection." And you just threatened her on my property. That gives me the right to shoot you where you stand, and no lawman in the territory would convict me for it." He stepped up onto the porch, positioning himself between Rosa and the intruders. His hand rested casually on the grip of one of his pistols, but there was nothing casual about the look in his eyes. "You would risk a gun fight over one woman?" the fat man asked incredulously. "Are you out of your mind?" "Probably," Daniel agreed, "but that does not change the facts. You have got about 10 seconds to get on your horses and ride away before I start shooting, and trust me when I say I do not miss." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension stretched taut enough to snap, and Rosa held her breath, waiting to see if violence would erupt. Then the fat man spat in the dirt and turned back to his horse. "This is not over, Reeves," he snarled. "You have made an enemy today." "Add yourself to the list," Daniel said dismissively. "Now get out of here before I change my mind about letting you leave in one piece." The 5 men mounted up and rode away, casting dark looks over their shoulders. Daniel stood watching until they were completely out of sight, his body still tense and ready for a fight. Only when they had disappeared did he turn to Rosa. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice urgent now. "Did they hurt you?" Rosa shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Now that the danger had passed, she was shaking, adrenaline and fear catching up with her all at once. Daniel seemed to realize this, because he gently took her arm and guided her back into the house, settling her into a chair by the table. "Sit," he ordered. "I will get you some water." He poured water from the pitcher and pressed the cup into her hands. Rosa drank gratefully, the cool liquid helping to settle her racing heart. Daniel crouched down in front of her chair, his eyes searching her face. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. "Did they touch you, threaten you?" Rosa recounted the confrontation, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. Daniel's expression grew darker with every word, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "I should have killed him," he muttered when she finished. "Should have put a bullet in him the moment I saw him on my land." "You did the right thing," Rosa said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "You sent them away without anyone getting hurt. That is what matters." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You have got more sense than I do," he said finally. "Most women would be hysterical after something like that." "I am not most women," Rosa said, lifting her chin. "I have been through worse than a few threats from a man like that. It takes more than words to break me." A slow smile spread across Daniel's face, transforming his usually stern features. "No," he agreed. "I do not suppose you are most women, and I do not suppose it does." He stood and moved toward the fireplace, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that spoke of frustration and weariness. "This is my fault," he said. "I should have known that bastard might try something, should have left one of the men here instead of taking them all to Yuma with me." "You could not have known," Rosa said, "and I am fine, thanks to you." "Thanks to luck," Daniel corrected. "I finished my business early, decided to ride through the night to get home. If I had waited until morning like I originally planned." He trailed off, but Rosa understood what he was not saying. If he had waited, those men would have taken her, and by the time he returned, she would have been gone. "But you did not wait," Rosa said firmly. "You came home and you saved me. Again, that seems to be becoming a habit with you." Daniel turned to look at her, and something passed between them in that moment, something electric and undeniable. Rosa felt it in her bones, in the sudden quickening of her pulse. This was more than gratitude, more than relief. This was something else entirely, something that both thrilled and terrified her. The spell was broken by the arrival of Miguel, Elena, James, and Tucker, all of them having heard the commotion and come running. Daniel had to explain the situation all over again, and by the time everyone was satisfied that there was no immediate danger, it was late, and Rosa was exhausted. She excused herself to her room and collapsed onto her bed, her mind racing. Today had been terrifying, but it had also revealed something important. Daniel had come back for her. He had ridden through the night, had been willing to face down 5 armed men to protect her. That meant something. It had to mean something. But what? Was it just about his sister, about keeping the promise he had made to himself? Or was there something more, something personal between them? Rosa did not have answers to these questions, and she was too tired to puzzle them out tonight. She undressed and climbed under the covers, letting sleep claim her. The next morning at breakfast, Daniel announced that he was hiring 2 more men to help around the ranch, specifically to provide additional security. He also made it clear to everyone present that Rosa was not to be left alone, that someone should always be within shouting distance of the house. Rosa wanted to protest that she did not need a nursemaid, but the memory of yesterday's confrontation was too fresh. She held her tongue and accepted the new arrangements with as much grace as she could muster. The weeks that followed were tense. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the fat man and his companions to return and make good on their threats. But days passed, then weeks, and there was no sign of them. Gradually, the ranch settled back into its normal routine, though Daniel remained more watchful than before, and the new security measures stayed in place. Rosa found herself spending more time with Daniel, not by design but simply because their paths crossed more often now. He had started taking his evening meals in the house instead of with the ranch hands, saying it was easier than having Alina cook in 2 places. They would sit across from each other at the table, making small talk about the day's work, the weather, the ranch. It was during one of these dinners, about 2 months after the confrontation, that Daniel asked Rosa about her life before the auction. She was surprised by the question, because he had always been so careful not to pry. But she found herself answering honestly, telling him about her father's gambling debts, about losing her teaching position, about the desperate journey west that had ended so disastrously. "I had a position waiting for me in San Francisco," she said, staring into her coffee cup. "At a girls' school. It would have been a good life, respectable and secure. Now I suppose they have filled the position with someone else, and I have lost that opportunity forever." "You could still go," Daniel said quietly. "When you have worked off your debt, I mean, you could go to San Francisco and try to find another teaching position." "I suppose I could," Rosa agreed, but the words felt hollow. The truth was, she was not sure she wanted to go to San Francisco anymore. Somewhere along the way, this ranch had started to feel like home. Alina had become the mother figure she had lost, Miguel a kind and protective uncle. Even the rough ranch hands treated her with respect and affection. And Daniel? Well, Daniel had become something she did not have words for yet. "What about you?" she asked, turning the question around. "What did you do before the war? You never talk about your past." Daniel was quiet for so long that Rosa thought he might not answer. Then he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "My family had a plantation in Virginia," he said. "Tobacco, mostly. I was the second son, so I was not going to inherit, but I had a good life. Then the war came and I enlisted because that is what young men like me did. We thought it would be a grand adventure, that we would be home by Christmas." He laughed bitterly. 4 years later, half my friends were dead, my family's plantation was burned to the ground, and everything I had known was gone. My father died during the war, my mother shortly after from grief and pneumonia. My older brother tried to rebuild, but the plantation was too far gone. Last I heard, he had sold what was left and moved to Atlanta to work as a clerk. And my sister, Catherine, she was going to come west with me, start fresh in Arizona. You know how that story ended." "I am sorry," Rosa said, and she meant it. She understood now why Daniel had been so determined to save her, why he drove himself so hard, why he rarely smiled or laughed. He was carrying the weight of all that loss, all those failures, and he did not know how to put it down. "We have both lost a lot," Daniel said, meeting her eyes. "But we are still here, still fighting. That has to count for something." "It does," Rosa agreed. "It counts for everything." Something shifted between them that night, some invisible barrier crumbling. After that, their evening conversations became longer, more personal. Daniel told her stories about the war, about the men he had served with, about the beautiful and terrible things he had seen. Rosa told him about her students back in Philadelphia, about her love of books and learning, about her dreams for the future. And slowly, without either of them quite meaning for it to happen, friendship turned into something deeper. Rosa caught herself watching Daniel when he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders and arms, the way he moved with such confidence and purpose. She found excuses to be near him, to brush past him in the kitchen, to sit close to him by the fire in the evenings. Daniel, for his part, was no less affected. Rosa would catch him staring at her with an expression that made her heart race. He became more solicitous of her comfort, bringing her small gifts when he went to town. A new hair brush, a bar of fine soap, a book he thought she might enjoy. He laughed more often now, the sound rusty at first but gradually becoming more natural. The shadows in his eyes lifted, and Rosa dared to think that maybe she had something to do with that. Alina, of course, noticed everything. She teased Rosa gently about it, saying that Daniel was a different man since she had arrived, that he smiled more and scowled less. "He cares for you," Alina said one day as they were doing laundry together. "Anyone with eyes can see it." Rosa felt her cheeks heat. "We are friends," she protested weakly. Alina laughed. "Oh yes, friends. That is why he looks at you like a man dying of thirst looks at water. That is why you blush every time he enters a room, just friends." "It is complicated," Rosa said, wringing out a shirt with more force than necessary. "I owe him money, I work for him. It would not be appropriate for anything else to develop between us." "Appropriate," Alina scoffed. "This is the Arizona territory, not a fancy drawing room back east. Out here, you make your own rules. And if two people care for each other, if they can make each other happy, then who cares about appropriate?" Rosa wanted to argue, but she could not find the words. Because deep down, she knew Alina was right. She did care for Daniel, more than she had cared for anyone in a long time, and she hoped that he felt the same way. But neither of them had spoken of it, had acknowledged what was growing between them. It hung in the air like summer lightning, beautiful and dangerous and full of potential. The moment of truth came on a warm evening in October, about 4 months after Rosa had arrived at the ranch. The heat of summer had finally broken, and the desert nights were cool and pleasant. Rosa was sitting on the porch after supper, watching the stars come out, when Daniel came and sat beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. Coyotes yipping in the distance, the soft rustle of horses in the corral, the whisper of wind through the brush. "Rosa," Daniel said finally, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something." Rosa's heart began to pound. "All right," she said carefully. Daniel was quiet for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "When I bought you off that auction block," he said, "I told myself it was about my sister, about making up for not being able to save her, and that was true at first. But somewhere along the way it stopped being about Catherine and started being about you." He turned to look at her, and Rosa saw vulnerability in his eyes, mixed with fear and hope. You have changed everything, Rosa. This ranch, this life, it all feels different now. Better. You have brought light and laughter back into this house, and I did not realize how much I had been living in darkness until you came along. Rosa felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Daniel, she whispered, but he held up a hand. Let me finish, he said. Please. I know I have no right to feel this way. No right to ask for anything more than the agreement we made. You owe me a debt, and I am your employer, and that makes everything complicated. But I cannot keep pretending that I see you as just a worker, as just someone fulfilling an obligation. Because I do not. I see you as a woman I admire, a woman I respect, a woman I have come to care for deeply. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. I am not good with words like this, he said. I am a simple rancher, and I have spent more time with cattle and horses than I have with women. But I know my own heart, and my heart is telling me that you are someone special, someone worth fighting for, someone worth building a life with. Rosa could barely breathe. What are you saying? She asked, though she thought she knew, hoped she knew. I am saying that I am in love with you, Rosa Hartley, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. I am saying that I do not want you to leave when your debt is paid off. I am saying that I want you to stay here with me as my wife if you will have me. Not as an employee, not as someone fulfilling an obligation, but as my partner, my equal, my love. The tears spilled over then, running down Rosa's cheeks. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, I will have you. Because I love you too, Daniel Reeves. I think I have loved you since the moment you cut the ropes on my wrists and told me I was coming home. I just did not know it yet. Daniel let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. Rosa went willingly, burying her face against his chest and feeling his heart pounding as hard as her own. He held her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear, and Rosa held him back just as fiercely. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with such tenderness that Rosa felt her heart might burst. I am going to kiss you now, he said, if that is all right with you. More than all right, Rosa whispered, and then his lips were on hers, warm and gentle and perfect. The kiss was everything Rosa had dreamed of and more, sweet and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Daniel rested his forehead against hers. I am going to make you so happy, he promised. I am going to spend every day of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me. I could never regret it, Rosa said, smiling through her tears. You saved me, Daniel, in every way a person can be saved. And now I get to spend the rest of my life showing you how grateful I am, how much I love you. They sat together on the porch for a long time after that, wrapped in each other's arms, making plans for their future. Daniel said he would ride to Castle Dome tomorrow and arrange for a preacher to come out to the ranch. They would get married as soon as possible, no point in waiting when they both knew what they wanted. What about my debt? Rosa asked at one point. I have only paid off a fraction of what I owe you. Daniel shook his head. Consider it forgiven, he said. You do not owe me anything, Rosa. You never really did. That money bought your freedom, nothing more. But $1,000, Rosa protested. That is a fortune. I cannot just let you write it off. You can and you will, Daniel said firmly, because you are going to be my wife and what is mine is yours. That includes whatever money I have, whatever debts I hold. We are partners now, Rosa, equals, and partners do not keep score. Rosa wanted to argue further, but the look in Daniel's eyes stopped her. This was important to him, she realized. This was his way of making sure she understood that he did not see her as an obligation or a possession, but as someone he valued and respected. So she nodded and let it go, trusting him to know what was right. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Daniel did indeed ride to Castle Dome and returned with a traveling preacher who agreed to perform the ceremony. Alina went into a frenzy of preparation, determined to make sure the wedding was memorable even if it was happening on short notice. She sewed Rosa a new dress, a beautiful creation in cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Miguel and the ranch hands cleaned and decorated the main room of the house, hanging wildflowers and making everything as festive as possible given their limited resources. Rosa floated through it all in a daze of happiness. She could scarcely believe that this was her life now, that she was about to marry the man who had saved her from a fate worse than death. Every time she caught sight of Daniel, every time their eyes met across a room, she felt that same thrill of joy and anticipation. The wedding took place on a Saturday in late October, with the whole ranch in attendance along with a few neighboring ranchers and their families who Daniel had invited. It was a simple ceremony, conducted in the main room of the house with everyone gathered around. Rosa wore her new dress and carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers that Alina had picked that morning. Daniel wore his best clothes, a black suit that was a little worn but still respectable, and he looked so handsome that Rosa's breath caught when she saw him. The preacher led them through the traditional vows, and when it came time for Daniel to place the ring on Rosa's finger, he produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. Rosa slipped her own ring, which he had bought in Castle Dome, onto his finger, and they were pronounced husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said with a smile, and Daniel did not need to be told twice. He pulled Rosa into his arms and kissed her soundly, to the cheers and applause of everyone present. The rest of the day was given over to celebration. Alina had prepared a feast, roasting a pig and making all of Rosa's favorite dishes. There was music, with Miguel playing his guitar and others joining in with whatever instruments they had. There was dancing, with Daniel sweeping Rosa around the cleared space in the main room, despite his protestations that he was not much of a dancer. There was laughter and joy, and a sense of community that Rosa had never experienced before. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Daniel took Rosa's hand and led her outside. They walked together to the creek, where the water burbled softly over the rocks and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Happy?" Daniel asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I have ever been in my life," Rosa said honestly. "I never thought I could feel this way, never thought I would find someone who loves me the way you do." "Then we are even," Daniel said, "because I never thought I would find someone like you. Someone brave and strong and beautiful, someone who could look at a broken man like me and see something worth loving." "You are not broken," Rosa said fiercely. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever known, and I am so proud to be your wife." They stood together by the creek as night fell completely, wrapped in each other's arms, and Rosa thought about the journey that had brought her here. The tragedy and terror of the stagecoach attack, the nightmare of the auction, the fear and uncertainty of those first days on the ranch. All of it had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life. And she would not change a single thing, because every hardship had been worth it to find this happiness. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, as Rosa and Daniel learned to navigate their new relationship. They had to figure out how to share a home and a life, how to balance their individual needs with their commitment to each other. There were disagreements, of course, mostly small things like how to manage the household budget or whether to expand the herd. But they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise and support each other. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Rosa's organizational skills and education proved invaluable, as she took over the bookkeeping and correspondence, freeing Daniel to focus more on the physical work of running the operation. She also started a small school for the children of the ranch hands and neighboring families, teaching reading and arithmetic twice a week in the main room of the house. It was a small thing, but it gave her a sense of purpose beyond her domestic duties, and Daniel encouraged her fully. Winter came, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain that turned the desert green for a few precious weeks. Rosa loved this time of year, when the harsh landscape softened and wildflowers bloomed in unexpected places. She and Daniel would sometimes ride out together in the evenings, exploring the land that was now as much hers as his, and she came to appreciate the stark beauty of the Arizona territory. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, foals wobbled on uncertain legs, and the fields turned lush with new growth. It also brought news that Rosa was expecting their first child. When she told Daniel, she watched his face cycle through shock, joy, and finally fierce protectiveness. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Rosa, I promise you, I will be the best father I can be. This child will never doubt that they are loved and wanted." "I know," Rosa said, covering his hand with her own. "I have never doubted that for a moment." The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was brutal, and Rosa suffered from constant nausea and exhaustion. But Daniel was attentive and supportive, taking on extra household duties and making sure she rested as much as possible. Elena fussed over her like a mother hen, constantly bringing her special foods and remedies that were supposed to help with the symptoms. In September, after a long and difficult labor, Rosa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Daniel's father, and from the moment Rosa held him in her arms, she knew that her heart had expanded in ways she had never imagined possible. Thomas had Daniel's blue eyes and Rosa's dark hair, and he was perfect. Daniel was a devoted father from the start. He would spend hours just holding Thomas, talking to him in a soft voice, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Rosa would watch them together and feel such overwhelming love that it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had always wanted, even when she had not known to want it. A family. A home. A place where she belonged. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler, and then into a bright, thoughtful boy. He was joined by a sister, Catherine, when he was 3, and then 2 years later by another brother, Samuel. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Daniel and Miguel expanded the herd and bought more land, building the Double R into one of the most successful operations in the area. Rosa's school grew too, until she was teaching nearly 20 children from the surrounding homesteads and ranches. She loved the work, loved seeing young minds develop and expand, loved knowing that she was making a difference in these children's lives. Castle Dome grew from a rough mining camp into a proper town, with a church, a school, a hotel, and even a small library that Rosa helped establish. The territory was becoming more civilized, more settled, and while it lost some of its wild edge, Rosa did not mourn that change. She had seen enough of the wild and dangerous side of the frontier. She was content with peace and stability. Miguel and Elena aged gracefully, becoming beloved grandparents to Rosa and Daniel's children, even though they were not related by blood. James eventually saved enough money to buy his own small ranch nearby, and he married a girl from Yuma. Tucker stayed on at the Double R, becoming Daniel's right-hand man and eventually foreman. New ranch hands came and went, but the core family remained solid. Rosa never forgot the terror of that day on the auction block, but the memory lost its power to hurt her over time. It became just another part of her story, a dark chapter that had led to everything bright and beautiful that came after. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, she and Daniel would sit on the porch and talk about those early days, marveling at how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" Rosa asked one such evening when they had been married for nearly 10 years. "Spending all that money on me, taking on the responsibility of someone you did not even know." Daniel looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Regret it," he repeated. "Rosa, buying you off that auction block was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything. A family, a home, a reason to wake up in the morning with a smile on my face. If anything, I got the better end of the deal." "I think we both did," Rosa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I think we saved each other, you and I." "Maybe so," Daniel agreed, kissing the top of her head. "Maybe so." As the years continued to pass, Rosa and Daniel watched their children grow into fine young adults. Thomas proved to have his father's gift with horses and his mother's head for business. He took over more and more of the ranch operations as Daniel slowed down, ensuring that the Double R would continue to thrive for another generation. Catherine was quieter, more bookish, and she eventually left Arizona to attend a women's college in California, much to Rosa's pride and Daniel's worry. Samuel split the difference between his older siblings, equally comfortable working with his hands and with his mind. Rosa continued teaching until she was in her 50s, only retiring when her own grandchildren started arriving and demanded her attention. She loved being a grandmother, loved spoiling Thomas's and eventually Samuel's children the way Alina had spoiled hers. Catherine remained in California, becoming a teacher like her mother, and though they did not see her as often as they would have liked, they treasured the letters she sent and the occasional visits. Daniel aged well, his dark hair turning silver, his face becoming more lined but no less handsome to Rosa's eyes. He moved a bit slower than he once had, but he remained active and engaged with the ranch until the very end. When he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, with Rosa holding his hand, the entire community mourned. He had been respected and admired, known as a fair and honest man who always kept his word. Rosa lived another 5 years after Daniel's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, writing her memoirs at Catherine's urging, and watching the world change around her. Arizona achieved statehood, automobiles began appearing on the roads, and the wild frontier of her youth became just a memory. But she never forgot those early days, never forgot the cowboy who had cut her ropes and told her she was coming home. When Rosa Hartley Reeves died at the age of 81, surrounded by her family in the house Daniel had built, she went peacefully and without regret. She had lived a full and beautiful life, had known love and loss and joy in equal measure. She had raised 3 children and seen them become good, kind, successful adults. She had built a school and educated hundreds of children. She had turned a rough desert ranch into a home filled with laughter and love. But most importantly, she had taken the worst moment of her life, the moment when she stood on that auction block with her hands bound and her hope dying, and she had transformed it into the beginning of something wonderful. Because on that terrible day, a cowboy with sad blue eyes and a heart full of grief had seen her not as property but as a person worth saving. And in saving her, he had saved himself. The Double R Ranch continued to thrive for generations after Rosa and Daniel were gone, passing from Thomas to his children and grandchildren. The original house remained standing, preserved by the family as a reminder of where they had come from. Visitors would sometimes remark on the old photographs displayed in the living room, particularly one that showed a stern-looking cowboy and a beautiful dark-haired woman standing together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders and both of them smiling at the camera with unmistakable love in their eyes. The story of how they met, of the auction and the rescue and the love that grew between them, became a family legend, passed down through the generations. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could survive, that love could bloom in the most unlikely places. That sometimes the worst things that happened to us led to the best things in our lives. And in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, two graves sat side by side beneath a spreading cottonwood tree. The headstones were simple but well-maintained, bearing the names Daniel Reeves and Rosa Hartley Reeves, along with the dates of their births and deaths. But it was the inscription beneath Rosa's name that told the real story, the words that Catherine had chosen to sum up her mother's remarkable life. She was auctioned with her hands bound. He cut the ropes and brought her home. Together, they built a love that lasted forever.